Okay, so this is test 88, game 1. We have a company is scheduling presentations of 6 instructional films. We have G, M, O, P, S, and U in 2 different theaters, East and West. And on a single afternoon, there will be a presentation in each theater at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and 3 o'clock. Each film will be presented exactly once. Okay, so as far as the setup goes, this is considered a hybrid game. We are ordering and grouping. So we're grouping our variables within two groups, either Eastern or Western. And within those groups, we're ordering them. It's either going to be shown at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, or 3 o'clock. It's important to note that even though we do have 2 groups here, our circle slash method won't really work. It'll get really complicated. I guess you could do it, but it'll be really complicated because we're ordering within those groups as well. So we could decide which one or which 2 groups that they're in, but then that second element of ordering kind of disrupts the method. So this is a basic setup for a hybrid game. Groups on one side, ordering on the other. You could also flip it, do it horizontal. It really doesn't matter. It's the same thing. So I do mine vertical for some reason. I just decided to write it like that. So we're doing vertical this time. Okay, so going into rule 1, it says S must be presented in the West Theater. So if it's in the West Theater, that means that there are 3 spots that it could go in. It could go in 1, 2, or 3. My rule for figuring out when to make worlds is if I have anything more than 4 worlds happening from it, I'm not going to start making worlds there. So considering I only have 3 possible scenarios for this rule, I don't mind starting here. I also think it wouldn't be a bad idea if you wanted to move on and see if there was something else that you could work with. It's kind of up to you. We're looking for the most restrictive rule. And so in this case, since there's only 3 worlds, I'm going to make worlds off of it. So we have one world where S is in 1, S is in 2, and S is in 3. Now we've got S placed. Cool. Next rule says U must be presented in the East Theater. So let me label my worlds. So every world is going to have to be their own world, and so we'll have to make sure that every world applies or abides by all of our rules. So for this scenario, we can't really go, okay, well, 1, 2, 3, there's 3 spots where you can go in, 1, 2, or 3. We can't just do 1 here, 2 here, 3 here. We have to take it world by world because these are all different. So technically, you could go in 1 through 3 in this world, 1 through 3 in this world, 1 through 3 in this world. And so going back to what we talked about earlier, finding the most restrictive rule and having kind of a limit of how many worlds we're going to start with, I would have to make 9 worlds to fully implement this rule. I would have to do 3 where S is in 1 and U is in each of the 3 spots. Another 3 where S is in 2 and U is in each of the 3 spots, and another 3 where S is in 3 and U is in one of the 3 spots. So considering that there's a lot of worlds coming from this, I'm just going to write it up here that U is in the Eastern, and we'll revisit it. There might be another rule that's going to cause it to be a little more restrictive. So, okay. Next rule says M must be presented earlier than both O and P. So in our case, M is going to have to be higher up than O and P. It's important to note that it says it must be presented earlier. So we can't have M and O be presented at the same time because M has to be earlier. If the rule had said something like O can't be presented earlier than M, then yeah, we could have them at the same time. But because we're restricted to M has to go before O and P, we can't have them on the same time length. So basically what that tells me is M can't be 3. And so looking at world 1, we could do M in 1, M in 2 on both stages. I'm not opposed to the starting there. It's going to create a lot of worlds because in the second one, M could go in one of these 2 stages, and the second one, M can go in these 2, or not really, not those 2, but M can go in these 2. So I kind of got a lot going on there. I'm going to leave it as is for now. We might come back to that one. I'm not super thrilled with starting with that one, but I think we could figure out where to start with that one. Yeah. So the 4th rule says U must be presented earlier than G. Now it's important to note too that it's just telling us the time portion. It's not telling us which stage it's on. So going back to rule 3 and talking about rule 4, we don't care where M is or U is or O and P or G, so long as time-wise M is above O and P, U is above G. So technically I could have M here, O here, and P here. That would be fine. M is still above O and P. And then technically I could also have M here, O here, P here, U here, G here. Because they can kind of bounce between stages. It's just the time that we're restricted from. So looking at the 4th rule, U is before G. Well, knowing that U has to be in the Eastern, that means that U also cannot be in 3, because we can't have them on the same field or the same level, same time, because U has to be before it. So I think I'm going to start there. So in my first world, that means U can go in 1 or 2. Oh, why did I write N? That's west. South. 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to have one where U is here and U is at 2. Then I'm going to go into the second world, do the same thing, because U can go in 1 and 2 in this world as well. So we're going to do U here, and we'll come back and deal with G in a minute, but I want to place U first because then it'll kind of direct me where G could go. And then same thing here, break it to a new world because U can go in 1 or 2. So one where U is in 1, one where U is in 2. Okay, now since U has to be before G, I can go into each world and kind of figure out where U could go. So in the first world, G is going to pretty much go anywhere because it's kind of a floater. Anywhere it goes, it'll still be later than U, which is all I'm really concerned with right now. Same with 4. G is going to flop back and forth here because G can only go in 3 if U is in 2, since U has to be before G. Up here, I have 3 places that G could go in. If I wanted to, I could break it up into 3 worlds, but I'm just going to kind of notate that G can't go here for now. And then going into 5, G is going to have to flip-flop here. 3, same thing as 2. G just can't go up here. G can go in any of the 2s and on 3 Eastern. And then down here, G is forced to go in our 3rd spot. Okay. Going back to that 3rd rule, since that's the only other rule that we're kind of on, we're kind of working with here. Looking at world 1, if M has to be before O and P, that means that M can only go in 2. I don't really care about which stage it's on because O and P are going to flip-flop down here. And that means that M will go before O and P. And that forces my G to flip-flop with M. And we're still good with that 4th rule because U is before G. And again, I don't care what stage they're on. So this is a valid world. Looking at 4, okay. M's going to have to go in this first spot right here. In order for O and P to come after it, we'll have to fill these 2 empty spots. And again, I don't care what stage they're on, so G and O and P can flip-flop, and we're still after U for G, so we're still good with that rule. Valid world. Up here, I am actually forced to place M somewhere. So technically, without looking at any of the other rules, I could have M here, or I could have M here. But if I have M in my second spot, let me show you what happens. If I have M in my second spot and it has to come before O and P, that means that my G is going to be forced to go up here, and G can't go there. So in order for the world to work out, oh, I don't know what I just deleted. There we go. In order for that world to work out, we're going to have to put M here. O and P can't go on 1 because we have to have something above it. And M's the only other variable that we have to work with. So M's going to go up here. And as for O, P, and G, anywhere, any of those 3 spots, those variables can bounce around, and they're not going to violate our rule because our variables that have to go before them are at the top. So I'm going to write up here that they're floaters. And that notates to myself that they can go in any of those 3 empty spots. Okay. Looking at 5, this world actually dies because if M is going to go before O and P, there's no spots, no 2 spots below M that we can have. So this actually dies. Because if I put M there, O and P are going to flip-flop, and M and O or P are going to be on the same time, and that can't happen. So that world dies. Going up to my 3rd world, we're going to have the same scenario as 2. If we put M actually has to go on 1 for another reason. The other reason is if we put M at a 2, we don't have another spot for O and P to exist below M. So M has to go in our Wednesday 1 o'clock spot. And G, O, and P are going to flip-flop because our 2 variables that have to go before all the variables that has to go before are in the first spot. So G, O, P, that's another valid world. Our last world also does not exist because if M has to go before 2 variables, there are no spots where M can have 2 blanks below it. If I have M here or here, my O and P are going to go here or here, and I can't have O and P on the same time as M. So that world dies. So we are left with these 4 worlds to go into our questions with. I'm going to erase our dead worlds. We're going to go straight into the questions. Okay. Question 1 says, if P is presented at 2 o'clock in the West Theater, which one of the following must be true? So I'm going to look at all the worlds where I can have P at 2 o'clock on my West Theater. That happens in 4. I can have P here and O here flip-flopping with G. And it also happens in 3, where I can have P here and G and O flip-flopping with each other down there. What must be true? G is presented at 3. Not necessarily, it could be at 2. M is presented at 1. That's happening in both my worlds, so I like it. O happens at 2. Not necessarily. Down here, I can have O at 3. Actually, in that world, it has to be at 3. S is at 1. Not necessarily. It could happen at 3 over here. U is at 1. Could happen at 2 over here. So my answer choice is B. 2 says which one of the following cannot be true, so it's not giving me a restriction, which means I can go into all my worlds and I have to find something that does not happen in any of my worlds. So G is presented earlier than M. I'm not seeing that happen. So I kind of like that one so far. P is presented earlier than G. That could happen down here. We could have P here and G at 2, or sorry, at 3. So that's wrong. S is presented earlier than P. Doesn't have to be true. I can have P at the same time as S, so it wouldn't be earlier than P, so that doesn't, or that could be true. Sorry, S presented earlier than P. I could have that happen. S could be presented earlier than P. So it can be true, and because it can be true, it's wrong. O is presented at the same time as G. That can happen down here. So that's wrong. O is presented at the same time as U. Again, same world. That can happen down here, O and U together. So that's wrong. So my answer is A. Next question says, if goals is presented at 3 in the East Theater, okay, where is that happening? Goals presented at 3 in the East Theater. That's happening here. That could happen here with O and P flip-flopping. And that could happen here, O and P flip-flopping here. Okay, so I'm looking at 2, 3, and 4. We're looking for something that could be true except, so all my wrong answer choices can be true. My correct answer cannot be true. Same question as the last one. Management is presented at 2 in the East Theater. I don't see that happening. So I'm going to leave that open. O is presented at 3 in the West Theater. It's presented at 3. That could happen down here. So that's wrong. S is presented at 1 in the West Theater. That can happen here, so that's wrong. S is presented at 2 in the West Theater. That can happen here, so that's wrong. U is presented at 2 in the East Theater. That can happen in 4, so again, that's wrong. So our answer is A. Okay. Next one, how many of the films are there, any of which could be presented at 3? This is one of those questions that making worlds really pays off because we just have to count. So we have O and P at 3, so that's 2. G is a floater, so that's another one. G can go at 3 here. We have S here, so that's 4. And we've already counted G, O, and P. So our answer is 4, which is C. Those questions are really nice to have worlds and can be a huge time saver. So next one says, if U is presented at 2, where is that happening? That is only happening in this world, so I can only look at this world. Then any of the following could be true except G is presented at 3. That could be true, so because we're looking for our exception to it, we can rule that out because that can be true. M is presented at 2. Don't have that happening. I kind of like that one so far. O is presented at 2. That could happen right here. O and P can flip-flop, so it can be presented at 2. P is presented at 2. I just said O and P flip-flop between 2, so that could happen. And S is presented at 1. That's happening there, so that could be true. Or, well, actually, this must be true. So our answer choice is B. 6 says, if management is presented at 2 in the East Theater, where's that happening? So it's happening here where we are not flip-flopping. M is at 2 in the East. That's the only world where it's happening. Okay, so we're looking for something that cannot be true. So again, something that cannot happen doesn't happen in that world, our 4 wrong answers can be true. G is presented at 2. That's happening in my world, so we can eliminate that. S is at 2. I like that one because we don't have S at 2. U is presented at 1. That has to be true, so it's a wrong answer. M is presented in the same theater as P. That could be true. O and P flip-flop, so P could be with M. So that means that it could be true, which makes it wrong. P is presented in the same theater as S. Again, O and P are going to flip-flop, so it could be with S. So we're looking for something that can't happen. So E is wrong, which leaves us with B. S is presented at 2. That cannot happen in that world. Okay. Number 7 is a substitute question. Do not do substitute questions if you're at this level. I want you to pick an answer and move on. They are huge time sucks. And if you're not getting 21 and above on a section, you can get more points by moving on and just guessing on this one. However, if you have about 2 minutes before your section ends, you can actually go through and actually eliminate the ones that are violating your current diagrams. Because if you think about it, substitute questions were wanting to exactly substitute the rule where it's not too restrictive and not restrictive enough. We want it to be just right, like Goldilocks, like just right. So if our answer choices are not following our diagrams, it's not an exact substitute. We created our worlds based off of the rules. So if we're gonna bring in a new rule to substitute one of our original rules, we have to come up with the exact same diagrams. So if I'm finding answer choices that are causing different worlds to happen or just can't happen in my worlds, then it's gonna be wrong because that's gonna cause other worlds to happen, which means it's not an exact substitute. So if you have at least 2-3 minutes, you can at least go through your answer choices, eliminate the ones that are violating your worlds, and at least narrow it down to a couple of answer choices, give you a better chance rather than just a 1 out of 5. So for example, this one says we are substituting for the condition that sales must be presented in the West Theater. So it has to be in the West Theater. So any of our answer choices that are going to violate our worlds or create new worlds is going to be wrong. So for example, A, S must be presented earlier than G. That does not have to be true. It's basically like a must be true question. Does not have to be true. We could have G here. And so if I substituted A for my Western rule, it's going to create new worlds. I wouldn't be able to have this world or this world, which means that it's not an exact substitute. So we can eliminate A. S cannot be presented in the same theater as goals. Pretty much the same thing. We could have G over here in our empty spot, and same with here. And so because we can have it happen where S is with G, this rule is an exact substitute, because if B was our substitute rule, if it was our new rule, we would not be able to have these two worlds, which are valid worlds with our original rules. So because it's giving us more restrictions, it's a wrong answer choice. C says S cannot be presented in the same theater as U. That has to be true in all of my worlds. It doesn't distort or create new worlds for me. So I like that one so far. We're going to pick that one for right now. Look at D and E and then revisit C as to why it could be a correct answer. D says S cannot be presented at the same time as G. Okay, I don't know why they're so obsessed with G, but that is pretty much the same thing that we have been talking about for A and B. We can have S at the same time as G. So because if we picked D, it would prevent this world from existing, which is a valid world in our diagram right now. It's wrong. It's too restrictive. It's not allowing me to have the worlds that I do have from my original rules. So we can eliminate D. E says S must be presented earlier than U or at the same time as U. Well, that's also wrong looking at my second world. U is presented earlier than S. So S does not have to be presented earlier than U or at the same time as U. So if E were our substitute rule, it would prevent that world from existing, this world from existing, and that's pretty much it. So E is wrong because it's too restrictive again. It's not allowing me to have all of my worlds that I need to have. So this question actually comes a little bit easier as a substitute question because all of the other wrong answer choices, they violate our worlds. So we can safely say that E is a good substitute. The other reason why E is a good substitute is if we are substituting for the condition, or we're looking for a rule that forces S to be in W. That's our original rule. Our original rule is S is in W. So we're looking for a rule that forces that to happen. The other rules, what is it? Rule 2, U must be presented in the East Theater. Well, if we kept that rule, which we have to keep all of our other rules. If we kept that rule and substituted our S has to be in W with S cannot be in the same theater as U, it would force S to go in W because U has to be in E. And so that is why C is our correct answer choice, is why it's substitute. But it can be substituted. So again, these questions are super hard, super time suckers. So pick an answer, move on. I wouldn't even really attempt them unless you're getting 21 out of 23, or you have 2 minutes to spare and you just want to get some obvious wrong answer choices out of the way. So if you have any questions about this game, please let me know. I try to explain as much as possible my thought process and how to build the worlds and stuff like that. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions.